Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Our hosts are Master Gardener volunteers for the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene counties, midpoint along the Hudson River Valley. So if you're interested in gardening or nature or just nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, listen in and enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we'll always have something to talk about.
A little note before we begin this episode. We pulled this interview from our radio archives from before the COVID era, when our precursor, Digging In with Master Gardeners, was a radio show on station WGXC 90.7 FM.
Welcome to Digging In with Master Gardeners from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene counties. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tim Kennelty, Master Gardener Volunteer with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I'm joined by Jean Thomas and Teresa Golden, two of our Master Gardener volunteers. In this segment, we'll be talking about harvesting the garden, which is a very timely topic for this time of year. So Jean and Teresa, let's talk about when and how to harvest your vegetables and a bit about how to extend the gardening season. Growing your food can be very satisfying. It pays off in a number of ways. Your fruits and vegetables are fresher. You can choose the exact varieties that you and your family enjoy. Plus, you can potentially save money when compared with purchasing vegetables at the grocery store or farmer's market. At Cornell Cooperative Extension, we can provide resources and advice to help you start small and gradually move up to producing more of your family's food. So how do you know when your veggies are ready?
Vegetables are sometimes like Goldilocks, where sometimes you need to pick them early, sometimes you need to pick them late, and sometimes they're just right. So it really does vary, and you need to listen to the plant and also listen to the fruit. An example might be that strawberries really need to be picked when they're ready. Tomatoes can be picked early. You don't want tomatoes to be on the vine too long, nor do you want strawberries to be on the vine too long, because then the critters are going to go after them. So it does really vary. Sometimes the plant will tell you itself, like when the bottom leaves of the garlic start to turn brown, you know they're ready to go. What you're really trying to do when you pick vegetables is prevent the signal within the plant that says their job is done and they stop producing. By picking the vegetable, what you're doing is saying, oh, I need to make more seed, let me make more fruit. And by picking at the right time, what happens is you end up getting a higher yield.
Part 1,
besides
a little note before we begin this episode. We pulled this interview from our radio archives from before the COVID era, when our precursor, Digging In with Master Gardeners, was a radio show on station WGXC 90.7 FM.
All the same family,
we think the material is timely and appropriate, so with the permission of the radio station, we've edited the interview to fit our podcast format and are presenting it again for your listening pleasure.
At the same
this is the first
timing.
Of 2 parts.
And once you've learned one,
outro for
you're
part 1.
Well set up to learn the
Our
other
next
ones.
episode
One
is
of the
conclusion of this interview about the life of honeybees.
Time-saving thing is to
episode 11, part 1.
If you put in
a little
plants,
note before we begin this episode,
because that gives you
we
all
pulled
your
this interview from our radio
instructions.
archives from before the COVID era,
so
when our precursor, Digging In with Master Gardeners, was a radio show on station WGXC 90.7 FM.
I just got some.
We think the material is timely and
from my neighbor.
appropriate,
What
so
about
with the
beans?
permission of the radio station, we've edited the interview to fit our podcast format and are presenting it again for your listening pleasure.
Harvest when
this
the
is the first of 2 parts about wildflowers.
Outro green
for
beans,
part
the
1.
yellow beans that the old
Our next
call
episode
wax
is a
beans.
conclusion of
Those
this
are all the ones that you make
interview
up in the salads
about
and casseroles
foraging.
all summer long.
Episode
And
11,
they
part
are
2.
Ready to pick.
A
Some
little
of them
note
are
before we
scheduled
begin
by
this
hybridizing
episode.
to
We
pick
pulled
the
the
entire
interview
plant
from
one
our
at a
radio
time, so
archives
you
from
can
before the
actually
COVID era,
calculate
when
that.
our
One of the
precursor,
other good
Digging
ways
In
to
with
go
Master
with those
Gardeners,
beans
was a radio
is to
show
plant
on
on a
station
2-week succession.
WGXC
So when your first crop
90.7
is
FM.
harvested, you can just
We
pick
think the
off the whole
material is
bunch,
timely and
and then you have another
appropriate,
batch
so with
coming
the
along right
permission of the
behind
radio
them. So that's one of
station,
the ways
we've
to
edited
outsmart
the
them, and
interview
it
to
also
fit our
extends your
podcast
harvest
format
season.
and are
The
presenting
other
it
kind
again
of
for your
beans are the
listening
ones that you're
pleasure.
growing for the seed.
This is the second of two
The
parts
fava
about
beans,
foraging.
the lima beans, the pinto beans, all the ones that you
One
cook
more.
up and you wait for the seed
Episode
to harvest
14.
within
A
the
little note
shell.
before we begin this
And those,
episode.
in
What
fact,
was that?
as far as preservation, require a whole different system. You don't
Episode
eat those
14.
off the
A little
vine.
note before
You
we
have to
begin this
preserve those or
episode.
store them. They
We
can be
pulled this
stored
interview
dry.
from our
There's
radio
different methods
archives
of
from before the
preparing them.
COVID era,
But beans,
when our
there are a
precursor,
lot of beans
Digging
that are
In
grown
with Master
for
Gardeners,
ornamental value.
was a radio
Scarlet
show on
runner bean is
station
absolutely gorgeous, and
WGXC
it's edible,
90.7
both as the
FM.
seed and
We
as
think the
pod.
material is timely
So
and
beans are
appropriate,
a way
so
fun
with the permission of the
adventure.
radio station,
It's
we've
almost like we
edited
could
the
do a
interview to
whole
fit our
program on
podcast
beans
format
with those
and are
facts.
presenting it again for your
Another
listening
key
pleasure.
thing, though, especially for
No
the beans
outros
that you're
needed with this
picking for
one.
the bean as of the
And that's
actual,
it.
not the seed inside, but the actual bean plant, you need to pick them every 2 to 3 days because it's amazing how quickly they grow. But you have to be real careful that you only pick them when the vines are completely dry. If you pick them when they're wet, what you can get is bean rust, and that can also spread other diseases as well. So if you want to avoid that, make sure you pick them only when they're dry.
What about cucumbers? I know I've grown cucumbers, and if they get too big, they're really not very tasty. What about cucumbers?
Well, the key to avoid that is to make sure you pick the cucumbers before they turn yellow. Cucumbers are a native of India, so they've been cultivated for more than 3,000 years. There's two major types. There's slicing pickles and there's pickling pickles. If you see burpless cucumbers, what they really mean is that they're thin and a more tender skin and a milder flavor. There's both bush or vining cucumbers. The vining ones obviously require trellising. And you can harvest them in almost any stage of development, but the key is to pick them before they turn yellow because then they're definitely too ripe. The slicing pickles are best picked around 5 inches long, while the pickling cucumbers, it's usually however big you want them, but it's typically about 2 inches long. By picking them also 2 to 3 times a week, you'll get the maximum yield. And you can also make sure that the seeds don't get too big because I find that they're a lot crisper when you pick them earlier.
Do you have a favorite type of cucumber, Teresa?
My husband and I both like the Kirby's. We find that they're really crisp and there's nothing like a fresh cucumber versus what you get in the middle of the winter.
I grew up on a truck farm. I like straight eights because that's what the professionals grow. And they're the nice big full-size cucumbers that you could just sit down with a salt shaker, wipe the pickle leaves off the top, and just eat them skin and all with a little bit of salt.
See, we have some diversity because I used to grow these Japanese long cucumbers, which were just delicious. I haven't grown them recently, but they're, I think, the burpless variety, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've always had trouble growing melons. What's the secret to growing good melons?
Luck. That's been in my...
I needed some that.
Yeah, that's what you were short of. Melons have a really rigid water requirements. They need a lot of water early on to build that plant. So this year, they had lots of water early on, but it was so early and so long a period that you couldn't get planted into the ground in time to take advantage of that. Melons need to be planted when the soil is warm enough. So it was wet, but it was still cold. So this year was not a good year for them. If you've got a year when you've got nice warm soil and then lots of rain after you've planted, then you've got happy melons. Once they've started setting fruit, decrease the amount of watering. Let the plant focus on building the sugars and everything in that melon. And then you've got a chance. Around here, we've got fairly short seasons. So go for the smaller melons. If you've ever gone to the track, you've met the hand melon, which is a very famous cantaloupe that's grown up there in Saratoga County, and it's phenomenal. And they every year have success, but I think they work a little harder at it than we would in our gardens. So the harvesting of the melons, if you get that far, is also tricky. You harvest when the stem separates easily at the point of attachment. And of course, there's some cultivars that don't do that, but mostly that's your rule of thumb. The fruit should show the changes in color and the degree of the rough skin and the softening at the blossom end. So I'm sure if you're growing them, you're out there every day saying, are they ready? Are they ready? Are they ready? That webbing, that netting is harsher, and you can actually physically feel a difference. Once you've harvested them, the best eating is the first 1 to 3 days. And the best flavor is if the melons are stored at 70 degrees for the final ripening. Then you can chill them before serving. So there's a couple of little tricks for the successful melon garden.
So you don't smell the melons like you do in the supermarket?
I do. I smell their belly buttons.
But that's probably a place we don't want to go.
No, we don't want to go there. Then we get into watermelons.
Are watermelons the same, or are they different?
Well, they're hard to smell their belly buttons. The same treatment, yes. Again, this is my family model. They're related to any other melon. When you've got your watermelon, you have to bear in mind that for every melon, you probably need about 20 square foot of space. So don't casually plant a melon expecting it to be fitting into your tidy garden plot. At the beginning of the season, they want 1 inch of water a week once they're planted and started to grow. They do recommend that you fertilize them when the vines begin to run and at the first fruit set. If you're serious about doing this, this is what you got to do. There are a lot of the ones that you can grow now that are smaller. They're more like the size of, say, a soccer ball. And those, you're going to get a lot more success. My granddaughter has grown them 3 seasons in a row, I'll have you know. Now, to know when to harvest, the tendrils are going to turn brown and dry. The color of the fruit itself fades back. It's not as bright, not as fresh looking. The skin is resistant to thumbnail penetration. When they're still on the green side, for lack of a better word, those skins are still too thin, and you can just stick your thumbnail through them. And another visual clue, the rind on the underside of the melon lightens up. It'll go to a pale yellow, and that's another clue. And for me, like in the supermarket, I go by the heft. If it feels like it's full, then to my mind, it's ready. And that's kind of all there is to watermelons.
But because the vine for both watermelons and melons are so vigorous and they require so much space, sometimes it's just easier to buy them in the supermarket or the farmer's market.
Oh, I can't believe you're saying this.
She's heard it.
On a gardening show. Well, I just bought a spiralizer because I'm obsessed with zucchini noodles. So tell me about summer squash and winter squash, because I'm going to plant some summer squash next year, I think, for my spiralizer. Tell me about summer and winter squash.
Okay, spiralizer. Okay. Summer squash is one step from cucumbers as far as the thickness of the skin. Summer squash is zucchini and yellow squash mostly. There are a couple others, but there are more variations on those anyway. Once they start coming in at maybe a 6-inch sized fruit, start harvesting and do not go away for a weekend, because they have a really good trick at hiding until they're baseball bat size under those nice.
So no vacation with squash.
No vacation, no. And I can teach you later some methods, because these are confidential, of how to sneak over to the neighbors with your basket of extra zucchini. That's later. On the winter squash, they have a much longer time frame that they need to ripen. But the beauty of that is that you don't have to fuss with them and harvest them and store them and do anything until just about everything else is finished. They store beautifully because you keep them on the plant until their shells are actually hard. You can tap on them. They're not soft like the zucchini and the yellow squash would be. There's all kinds of exotic shapes and sizes on the winter squash, and they're fabulous for soups and stews and cooking them up in cubes and freezing them to put into the stews later on in the winter. They will store well into the winter in a cool, dry place. They have a lot of benefits going on, but that's the main difference between the two. That the zucchini, the summer squash is closer to a cucumber, and the winter squash is better for winter.
But summer squash flowers are also edible. And they're also good in salads. You can fry them, saute them. There's a variety of ways you can use the flowers, which are great. For both squashes, especially the summer squash, one more time, regular picking. So every 2 to 3 days, make sure you go out to check. Otherwise, you'll get those baseball bats. And if you get those big zucchinis, what the plant is saying is, I'm done. I don't need to produce anymore. So if you want to keep the production and the yield up of the crop, again, pick often.
So have you been making a lot of zucchini bread, Teresa? Is that what you're telling us?
I made a lot, except then I got hit with the dreaded squash borer. And all of a sudden, my plants started to wilt. So It's
Maybe it,
tough
maybe
territory.
it's just time.
Yeah, time is
Good
everything.
news, bad news.
Right.
So, Jean, you were talking about the brassica family, all those kind of cold weather cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, the ones that are really good to eat in the winter. Tell us about those.
Well, I don't grow them because of that, so that's Teresa's feels. Teresa, she loves them.
Yeah, I really like the brassica family, whether it be cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, or Brussels sprouts. And they're all a little bit different relative to when you harvest them. Cabbage, you have to harvest the head when they're firm before it splits, and that's always tricky to do it just in time. You remove the loose outer leaves, cut the stem in the ground, and you may see some smaller heads start to develop that could also be used. The key with cabbage, though, is to make sure that it gets really good soil and lots of water to be successful. Otherwise, it can be a little bit picky. Cauliflower is also a member of the family. It's ready when the cauliflower head is firm and heavy before the curd starts to separate or become what they call racy. It's if you find that the head is soft or the leaves starting to turn yellow, it's too late already. But when the heads are about only 2 to 3 inches of diameter, the trick is to take some of the leaves of the plant, cover the head to stop the head from turning yellow. And when about 1 to 3 weeks later, you're going to see the head grow to about 6 to 7 inches in diameter, and then you'll be ready to harvest. Broccoli is a fairly prolific plant. I'm actually very pleased with how easy it is to grow broccoli and how productive it is. You get the head when it's about 5 to 10 inches across, and you cut it about 6 to 7 inches below the head. And depending upon the variety that you get, you'll also see some side sprouts start to shoot up, and those are also delicious to use. So broccoli can produce well into the fall, and it'll even tolerate a light frost. So again, a great plant to grow. Brussels sprouts, another member of the family, can also handle a light frost. And many people feel that they're actually a little sweeter if they've been exposed to a bit of a frost. You pick the sprout when the sprouts at the base of the plant are firm, about 1.5 inches in diameter. Don't strip the leaves off because they're needed for growth. And you can also pinch out the growing stem at the top to get larger sprouts. But again, all members of this family are, I find, delicious.
I know we're talking about picking, but Brussels sprouts, don't they take really sandy soil, or is that something that you can grow around here?
I've grown them around here. And my soil's not super sandy.
Okay.
It's partly loamy.
I have a question on broccoli. Harvesting broccoli, all those little wormies.
I avoid those. I get rid of those if there's worms in there.
Is there a method you use?
Well, what you can do, both cauliflower and broccoli, you can put them both in salt water, cold salt water, and then we'll
Until the little corpses float to the top.
exactly.
Yeah, that's what
And
I've
you have to
done.
make sure that you can get rid of them.
For those who are first-time broccoli growers, it can be culture shock.
Well, you two have shared a lot of information in a short time period. I think you need to kind of move to my house and just start the vegetable garden. Our listeners can learn more by visiting ccecolumbiagreen.org/gardening. You can also send questions to us at colgremg@cornell.edu. But for now, let's dig back in. Root crops have a reputation of being able to be stored well. What are some examples, and how should they be harvested?
Okay, the classic beginner root crops are radishes and carrots, which you probably learned to plant when you were a child, or you've gone out with children. They're a wonderful starter crop. Parsnips are sort of a secret crop that more people should try. It's a wonderful soup stock, and they're terrific roasted. Beets are a little more complicated than you should do with children, but they're very easy also. What all of these have in common is they sort of hoist themselves to the surface, and their shoulders will show up above the soil, and you'll say, oh, look, it's almost time to harvest. And then you can dig them carefully with usually a fork, and that's all there is pretty much to them. They store beautifully because they're already oriented to cool, dry places. When you think about it, they've spent their whole life, the part that you're harvesting, underground in a cool, dry place. So you could take those, store them, dry them out a little bit before you store them, and put them somewhere dry. Do not store in contact with each other, because then you've initiated conditions for rot. So just bear that in mind when you're storing them. That goes for all the root crops. Onions, the same thing. Onions are a little trickier. They need to be air dried really before you start storing them anywhere. Potatoes are the magic crop. Most people, if you're growing potatoes, you're growing a field of them, and it's a whole nother thing. So it's not really as much of a home garden thing for a little play garden. So that's a kind of an issue that's beyond us. But they can be stored cold as well and will last you through the winter.
And how do you know, like, if something has gone bad? Is there a way for these root crops for you to know if you've stored it too long?
Yeah, usually you can smell it. Seriously, there are distinct scents. So if you're going into a bag of something you've stored, onions have a specific smell. You have to go in, sort them out, get rid of the bad ones, make sure, again, that there's no contact between individuals of that crop. And that's my easiest, up to the feel as well, of course, because things are going to feel squishy, and you kind of are going to know right away. If you've got something stored away that you haven't been into for a while, and you walk back into that area, if it's a basement or a root cellar or something, you'll know before you get anywhere near the crop. The scents will have told you. That's pretty much it on the root crops.
The nice thing about root crops, because they're cool season crops, they can be planted both in spring and fall. So they're actually quite diverse because of that. The other thing is some of them you can actually use the tops as well as the root. So beets is a good example of that. It's got lots of vitamins in it, so that's something to consider it. But the real advantage is the fact that basically you can eat them year round because of how well they store. Carrots can be difficult depending upon your soil, but they can also be left in the ground for some frost. And as a result, they can also be a little sweeter in that case. Radishes are really easy. They grow so quickly. About 30 days, you can basically have some radish crops. And that's why it's really good for kids as a good starter. Onions require a lot of water. So the key to a good onion crop is making sure you get at least 1.5 inches of water a week, which this was a great year for that. So you've got, good onion crops as a result.
And if I were a new gardener and just starting out, what do you think is the easiest of these to start with? Radishes?
I would go with radishes.
We have to like radishes first.
Radishes can be spiralized too. I'm just going to go back to my spiralized obsession.
This is good.
The only thing I grow are tomatoes. What about tomatoes and eggplant? Because they so vary in terms of flavor, and there's so many varieties. What about tomatoes and eggplant?
Yeah, there's so many options when it comes to tomatoes. The key with tomatoes is to understand that the fruit sets optimally when night temperatures are between 58 and 70 degrees. And so sometimes people get frustrated. Why aren't my tomatoes moving along? If it's too cold or if it's too hot. So if it's over 90 degrees, tomatoes just stop and wait it out. And that can be frustrating. It took forever, it seemed, for the tomatoes to ripen this year. You can wait till they're fully ripe to harvest them, but you can also have them ripen right on your kitchen counter. And the advantage of picking them early is that the critters don't get to them, and it minimizes diseases in your tomato crop. Eggplant is same family, but it's a little bit different relative to when you pick it. You wait until the skin is very, very glossy. As soon as it gets dull, it basically is over mature, and you really don't want to take it then. If the seed inside the eggplant is brownish as opposed to white.
So I think we've come to the end of our segment.
One more thing. I just remembered, we forgot this other times. Garlic. Let's do garlic briefly before we shut down.
Well, we got to get rid of vampires, so we definitely have to do garlic.
Garlic is, again, one of those crops. As being an Italian, it's hard to live without. The key with garlic is to have the plant tell you when it's time to harvest it. So typically the bottom third of the plant is going to turn brown. And then you say, okay, now it's time to start testing. You pull up one or two, look at the size of the clump, also look at the size of the head, and make sure the clothes are not separating. If they're starting to separate, you probably should harvest it immediately, because that means it could be overly ripe. But you can't use it right away. You basically have to store the whole plant, pull up the whole plant, store it in a well-ventilated room or a screened-in porch or something like that, or lay them on a window screen. You can hang them. Once they dry out after a couple of weeks, then you basically cut the plant to about an inch from the bulb after about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you can store it in any kind of dark, dry, cool location. So they're actually pretty easy to harvest.
Jean, do you think we've now come to the end of our segment?
We have.
So learn more by visiting ccecolumbia.green.org/gardening for more information. You can also send questions to us at colgremg@cornell.edu. I'd like to thank Teresa Golden and Jean Thomas for their insights.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Xander Powers and Devin Connolly from the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thanks to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgv@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Facebook page. For more information about CCE of Columbia and Greene, visit our website or visit in person during business hours at our campuses in Hudson or Acra.
Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal program and employment opportunities in accordance with applicable laws.